Rebecca Martinez stood frozen at the doorway of her partially renovated barn, staring at something that shouldn't exist. The century-old wooden structure that had stood on her Vermont property for generations had finally revealed its secret during her ambitious renovation project. But it wasn't the historic timber frame or colonial-era artifacts that held her paralyzed. It was what lay revealed in the earth beneath it. There, partially exposed by the excavation for the new foundation, was a massive steel hatch, its surface covered in faded government markings, and what appeared to be a sophisticated locking mechanism unlike anything she'd ever seen before. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The 38-year-old single mother had purchased Willow Creek Farm just 8 months ago, seeing the rundown property as both an escape from her high-pressure engineering job in Boston and a fresh start for her and her son Tyler after her difficult divorce. She knew the 5-acre property needed work. That was part of the appeal. The price had been remarkably low due to foreclosure, and with her background in architectural engineering, she felt confident she could restore the historic farmhouse and barn to their former glory. What she hadn't expected was to uncover what appeared to be some kind of underground government facility beneath her barn. The renovation had been progressing steadily through the summer and early fall. The farmhouse was nearly finished, its clapboard siding freshly painted white, the shutters a cheerful blue that Tyler had chosen. The barn had been more challenging. Years of neglect had left the structure dangerously compromised, and the early winter storm that had blown through Pinewood Valley last week had caused a section of the flooring to collapse. That collapse turned out to be a blessing in disguise. Beneath the rotted floorboards, instead of the expected dirt foundation, Becca had discovered concrete, unusual for a farm structure of this age. Curious, she had expanded the excavation, carefully removing more of the damaged flooring to reveal what lay beneath. The November air was brisk as Becca stared down at her discovery, her breath forming small clouds with each exhale. The temperature seemed to drop even further around. The metal hatch, as if it generated its own microclimate. The faded yellow and black hazard markings along its edge stood in stark contrast to the rustic surroundings of the barn's weathered wood and rusted farm implements. Becca knelt down, brushing away decades of dirt from the surface of the hatch. The metal was cold to the touch, but strangely showed almost no corrosion despite apparently being buried for decades. Her fingers traced over an embossed emblem, an eagle with spread wings, clutching what appeared to be lightning bolts instead of arrows. Below it, barely legible, were the letters DARPA and a series of numbers that might have been a project code. Her mind raced with questions. Why was a government hatch hidden beneath an old Vermont barn? How long had it been here? What lay beneath it? The property's sale documents had mentioned nothing about previous government ownership or use. The local historical society had records of Willow Creek Farm dating back to 1876, when it was established by the Jenkins family, who had owned it until the recent foreclosure. Nothing in its documented history suggested any connection to government operations. Becca pulled out her phone to take photos, but to her surprise, the screen showed no signal. Unusual, since coverage at the farm was generally reliable. When she tried to open the camera app, the phone became unresponsive, then shut down completely, despite being nearly fully charged that morning. A chill that had nothing to do with the November air ran down her spine. She backed away from the hatch, nearly colliding with a stack of salvaged barn boards. Her renovation tools lay scattered around the excavation. The shovel and pry bar she'd been using to investigate the unusual concrete foundation now seemed inadequate in the face of this discovery. This wasn't something she could handle with her DIY renovation skills. This needed what exactly? The police? The historical society? She wasn't sure who to call about finding what appeared to be a secret government installation on private property. As Becca stepped outside the barn to see if her phone would work there, she noticed her son Tyler coming up the gravel driveway, returning from his friend's house down the road. The 12-year-old was bundled against the cold, his backpack slung over one shoulder, his unruly brown hair peeking out from under his knit cap. For a moment, Becca considered hiding her discovery from him, a mother's instinct to protect, but she knew her curious, tech-savvy son would find out eventually. "Mom, you won't believe what Mrs. Wilson said about our barn," Tyler called out as he approached, his words punctuated by excited breaths visible in the cold air. Becca felt a jolt of surprise. "What about our barn?" She said her husband told her that this whole area was part of something called Project Horizon back in the 60s. Mr. Wilson was in the military, and he said there were rumors about underground facilities all through the Northeast. "Isn't that cool? Like we could have a secret spy bunker under our property." The coincidence was too much. "Tyler," Becca said slowly, "I need to show you something, but you have to promise to keep it between us for now, okay?" Tyler's eyes widened, immediately sensing the seriousness in his mother's tone. "Is everything okay, Mom?" "Everything's fine, buddy. Just come with me." She led her son into the barn, carefully guiding him around the construction debris to the excavated area. Tyler's reaction was everything she expected. His jaw dropped, his eyes went wide, and a breathless, "No way," escaped his lips. "Is that real?" he whispered, reaching out toward the hatch before Becca gently caught his hand. "It's real, and we don't know what it is, or if it's safe," she said firmly. "That's why we need to keep this quiet until I figure out who to call." Tyler nodded, but his eyes never left the hatch. "Mom, this is exactly what Mr. Wilson was talking about. Project Horizon. They built underground bunkers to survive nuclear war. We learned about the Cold War in history class last month." Becca considered this. Frank Wilson was their nearest neighbor, a retired Army veteran in his 70s who had been surprisingly welcoming when they moved in, bringing over homemade stew and offering advice about rural Vermont winters. If anyone in Pinewood Valley would know about Cold War installations, it would be him. "Maybe we should talk to Mr. Wilson," she suggested, her practical nature asserting itself. "If he has information about what this might be, it could help us figure out what to do next." As they turned to leave the barn, Becca noticed something she had missed in her initial shock. Near the edge of the hatch was a keyhole, not a modern one, but an unusual star-shaped aperture with small, intricate mechanisms visible inside. Something about it triggered a distant memory. Willow Creek Farm hadn't been just a random purchase. Becca had been drawn to Vermont because her grandfather had grown up in the area. He had been a taciturn man, rarely speaking of his past, but he had given Becca a strange key on her 18th birthday, telling her that someday it might open the right door. The key had been unusual, brass with a star-shaped head and intricate teeth. She had kept it all these years, more as a memento of her grandfather than with any expectation it would ever serve a purpose. That key now hung on a leather cord in her jewelry box in the farmhouse. "Tyler, stay here but don't touch anything. I need to get something from the house." The afternoon light was fading as Becca jogged across the yard to the freshly painted farmhouse. Early November in Vermont meant darkness fell by mid-afternoon, and the temperature was dropping steadily. The mountains surrounding Pinewood Valley were already capped with snow, and the forecast called for more over the weekend. Inside the warmth of the house, Becca went straight to her bedroom, pulling open the drawer of her bedside table where her jewelry box sat. The old wooden box had been another gift from her grandfather, carved maple with intricate leaf patterns. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Opening it, she immediately spotted the leather cord and the brass key with its distinctive star-shaped head. As she lifted it, the weight of the key felt significant in her palm, heavier than its size would suggest. Holding it up to the light, she noticed details she'd overlooked before. Tiny letters were engraved along the shaft of the key, too small to read without magnification. And the star pattern wasn't just decorative, it was precisely engineered, with each point slightly different from the others. Her grandfather had been an engineer with the Department of Defense, she remembered. He had never discussed his work, even after retirement. Could there be a connection between his mysterious key and the hatch in her barn? The coincidence seemed too great to ignore. Returning to the barn with the key in hand, Becca found Tyler exactly where she'd left him, though he had taken out his phone and was apparently trying to research Project Horizon online. "My phone won't work in here either," he reported. "It's like something's blocking the signal." Becca nodded, unsurprised after her own phone's failure. "I found something. That might help," she said, showing him the key. "Your great-grandfather gave this to me years ago. I never knew what it was for, but look at the keyhole on that hatch." Tyler's eyes darted between the key and the hatch. "They match! Mom, are you going to open it?" The question gave her pause. Should she? The responsible thing would be to contact authorities first, but who exactly? Local police wouldn't have jurisdiction over what appeared to be a federal installation. And if she called some government agency, would they even believe her? Or worse, would they swoop in and take over her property without explanation? The financial reality of her situation also weighed on her mind. Willow Creek Farm had been a stretch financially, even at the foreclosure price. The renovation was eating through her savings faster than expected, and there had already been interest from Meadowbrook Development Corporation in purchasing the land for a resort complex. She had resisted so far, determined to preserve the historic property, but each unexpected renovation expense made their offers more tempting. If there was something significant beneath her barn, something the government wanted, how would that affect her ownership, her future, Tyler's future? Not yet, she decided. First, we're going to talk to Mr. Wilson. The drive to Frank Wilson's property took less than 5 minutes. His modest Cape Cod-style home sat on 20 acres of land that had once been part of a larger farming operation. At 72, Frank maintained impressive vegetable gardens and kept a few chickens, but most of his land had returned to forest. As Becca pulled her weathered Subaru into his gravel driveway, she noticed Frank was in his workshop, the lights glowing warmly against the gathering dusk. She had always liked Frank's straightforward manner and the way he treated Tyler with respect rather than condescension. If anyone could provide insight without overreacting, it would be him. Frank looked up from his woodworking project as they entered, his weathered face breaking into a smile beneath his white mustache. "The Martinez family. What brings you out in this cold?" Becca hesitated, suddenly unsure how to explain. Tyler had no such reservations. "Mr. Wilson, we found a secret government hatch under our barn. Mom has a key that might open it, and we heard you know about Project Horizon." Frank's smile faded, replaced by an expression Becca couldn't quite read. Surprise, certainly, but also something else. Recognition, concern. "Perhaps you'd better sit down," he said, gesturing to the stools beside his workbench. "Margaret mentioned Tyler's interest in the old stories. I didn't think much of it at the time." He set down his tools and wiped his hands on a rag, his movements deliberate, as if buying time to collect his thoughts. Project Horizon wasn't just stories, though most of what people know is speculation. I was stationed at Fort Drum in '67, and there were always rumors about installations throughout the Northeast. Nothing official, you understand. Becca placed the brass key on the workbench between them. "My grandfather gave me this. He worked for the Department of Defense as an engineer. Harold Jenkins, Did you ever hear of him? Frank's eyebrows rose. Jenkins? You're Harold Jenkins' granddaughter? He studied her face more carefully. I see it now. You have his eyes. You knew him? Becca asked, surprised. Not personally, no, but the name was mentioned. He was involved in several classified projects. Frank picked up the key, examining it with expert eyes. This is a Kronos key. Very sophisticated for its time, practically impossible to duplicate without knowing the exact specifications. What does it open? Tyler asked eagerly. Frank's expression grew serious. Secure installations, supply caches, communication bunkers. The government established hundreds of them during the height of the Cold War. Insurance policies against nuclear strikes. Most were decommissioned in the 80s and 90s. Some were repurposed. Others were simply forgotten. And one of them is under my barn, Becca said. It wasn't a question. Frank nodded slowly. If you found what I think you have, it's likely a Type 3 installation, a regional communications hub. The Northeast had dozens, all connected by secure channels. They were designed to maintain government continuity after a nuclear exchange. But why on our farm? Becca pressed. The Jenkins family owned that land for generations before me. How did the government build something like that without anyone knowing? The government had ways, Frank said, his tone suggesting this wasn't unusual. They'd approach farmers, manufacturers, even small-town businesses, offer them considerations for allowing access to their land, sometimes financial, sometimes other benefits. National security was a powerful motivator during the Cold War, patriotic duty and all that. He handed the key back to Becca. What are you planning to do with this discovery? It was the question she'd been asking herself since the moment she saw the hatch. I don't know. That's why we came to you. Who should I contact? Will this affect my ownership of the property? Frank stroked his mustache thoughtfully. That depends on what's down there and whether it's still considered active. Some installations were formally decommissioned. Ownership fully transferred to the property holders. Others remain technically under federal jurisdiction, even if they've been untouched for decades. He stood up, moving to a bookshelf in the corner of his workshop. After a moment of searching, he pulled out an old, leather-bound book and returned. Before you make any calls, you might want to see what's actually down there. Knowledge is leverage. You think I should open it? Becca asked, surprised. I think that key was given to you by your grandfather for a reason, Frank said carefully. Harold Jenkins wasn't the type of man to do anything without purpose. If he wanted you to have access to whatever's down there, he must have had his reasons. Becca considered this. Her grandfather had been methodical and forward-thinking. The key had been a deliberate gift, not a random keepsake. If you do decide to look, Frank continued, I'd be willing to accompany you. I have some experience with these installations, and an extra set of hands might be useful. The offer surprised her, but it made sense. Having someone with military experience and knowledge of Cold War infrastructure would be reassuring. Still, she hesitated, thinking of Tyler. I want to come too, her son interjected, reading her thoughts. Mum, you can't keep me away from a real secret underground bunker. Tyler, we don't know if it's safe, she began. Actually, Frank interrupted gently, these facilities were built to last centuries. They have redundant safety systems and were designed to be accessible after catastrophic events. If the integrity of the entrance is intact, the interior is likely secure as well. Becca weighed her options. Bringing Tyler into an unknown government facility seemed irresponsible, but leaving him home alone while she and Frank investigated wasn't ideal either. And she knew her son. His imagination would conjure far worse scenarios than reality if left to wonder. If, and I mean if, we decide to open it, we'll establish some ground rules, she told Tyler firmly. You stay right with us, touch nothing without permission, and if either Mr. Wilson or I say we leave immediately. No arguments." Tyler nodded solemnly, though his eyes betrayed his excitement. Frank closed his book and stood. "If you're determined to investigate, sooner might be better than later. Once word gets out, and in Pinewood Valley, word always gets out, you may find uninvited visitors expressing interest in your discovery." "Tonight?" Becca asked, surprised at the urgency. "No time like the present," Frank replied, already reaching for his coat. "Let me gather a few things that might be useful." As Frank collected supplies, flashlights, a first aid kit, work gloves, and an old military-issue compass that he claimed would work even if other electronics failed, Becca made a quick call to Mrs. Wilson. The retired schoolteacher readily agreed to feed their cat and check on the house while they were helping Frank with a project. Becca felt a twinge of guilt at the vague explanation, but wasn't ready to share the truth broadly. 20 minutes later, they were back at Willow Creek Farm, the headlights of Frank's pickup illuminating the weathered red siding of the barn against the darkening sky. Becca had brought warm clothes and bottled water, unsure how long their exploration might take. Tyler had insisted on bringing his backpack with his own exploration gear, a notebook, pencils, his digital camera, and snacks. The interior of the barn seemed different in the evening, the shadows deeper, the silence more complete. Frank's heavy-duty flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating the excavated area and the metal hatch that had upended Becca's renovation plans. Seeing it through Frank's experienced eyes, she noticed details she had missed earlier. The precision engineering of the hinge system, the subtle reinforcement around the perimeter. "Type 3 installation, just as I thought," Frank confirmed, kneeling despite his age to examine the markings. This was top-tier infrastructure, not just a supply cache or fallout shelter. These were designed for long-term operations. Becca clutched the brass key, its weight reassuring in her palm. What exactly might we find down there?" Frank stood, brushing dust from his knees. "Communications equipment, certainly. Generators, supply storage, possibly living quarters for a small staff. These hubs were designed to be self-sufficient for months, even years if necessary." "Will any of it still work?" Tyler asked, his voice hushed with anticipation. "Some of it might," Frank acknowledged. "These systems were built with remarkable redundancy and durability. The government didn't cut corners on doomsday infrastructure." Taking a deep breath, Becca stepped forward. "I guess there's only one way to find out." The star-shaped keyhole seemed to stand out against the metal surface as she approached, as if beckoning to the key in her hand. The brass key slid in smoothly, the intricate teeth aligning with internal mechanisms that had apparently remained pristine despite decades underground. For a moment, nothing happened. Then as Becca turned the key clockwise, she felt a distinct click, followed by a series of mechanical sounds deep within the hatch. Tumblers falling into place, pressure systems engaging. The sound was unexpectedly musical, like some complex instrument being tuned. A seam appeared around the perimeter of the hatch, and a soft hissing noise indicated the release of pressure. Then, with surprising smoothness, the massive metal door began to rise, seemingly of its own accord. The engineering was impressive, counterweights and hydraulic systems still functioning after what must have been at least 50 years. As the hatch opened fully, a rush of air escaped from below. Not the stale, moldy scent Becca had expected from a long-sealed underground chamber, but clean, slightly cool air with a faint metallic tang. A soft blue emergency lighting activated automatically, revealing a spiral staircase leading downward. "Auxiliary power systems still operational," Frank murmured, clearly impressed. "They built these to last." The staircase was industrial but elegant. Steel steps with non-slip surfaces, a sturdy handrail, and emergency lighting embedded in the walls. It descended in a perfect spiral, disappearing into a blue-tinged darkness below. "I'll go first," Frank offered, grabbing his flashlight. Standard procedure would be to illuminate and secure each level before proceeding. Becca nodded, glad. "For his experience. Tyler, stay between us. I'll follow behind." The descent was longer than Becca had anticipated, at least 30 feet below ground level. The air grew cooler as they spiraled downward, but remained surprisingly fresh, suggesting some ventilation system was still functioning. The blue emergency lights cast everything in an eerie glow, creating shadows that danced along the curved walls. At the bottom of the staircase, they faced a heavy metal door with another keypad and recognition system beside it. This one, however, had already been unlocked. The door slightly ajar, as if someone had left in haste. "That's unusual," Frank commented, pushing the door open carefully. "Protocol would have required secure lockdown during evacuation." Beyond the door lay a short corridor with several doorways branching off. The walls were lined with that same blue lighting, which seemed to brighten as they entered, responding to their presence. The floor was polished concrete, still immaculate after decades, and the walls were painted a functional pale gray. "It's like a sci-fi movie," Tyler whispered, his voice filled with awe. The first room they explored appeared to be a monitoring station. Banks of equipment lined the walls. Oscilloscopes, radio receivers, early computer systems, and devices Becca couldn't identify. A central console dominated the space, its surface covered in switches, dials, and small cathode ray screens. "Communications, monitoring," Frank explained, his flashlight playing over the vintage technology. They would have been tracking radio transmissions, watching for patterns that might indicate Soviet activity. Remarkably, some of the equipment still showed signs of power. Small indicator lights glowing softly, though the main systems appeared dormant. The next room contained rows of filing cabinets and a large table with maps still pinned to its surface. The maps showed the northeastern United States, with various locations marked in red and connected by lines. "The network," Frank said, studying the maps. "Each point represents another installation like this one. They were all connected, by telephone lines, by radio, even by underground cables in some cases." As they continued their exploration, they found storage rooms with preserved supplies, a small medical bay, and what appeared to be sleeping quarters with 4 neatly made bunks. Everything was meticulously organized and preserved, as if the occupants had expected to return. Then they reached a heavy door at the end of the main corridor. Unlike the others, this one was sealed with a sophisticated electronic lock that still appeared to be active, a small keypad glowing with green light. "This would be the primary operations center," Frank said, examining the lock, "the most sensitive area of the installation." Becca hesitated. "Should we try to open it?" Before Frank could answer, Tyler pointed to a small plaque beside the door. "Look, Mom, it has your name on it." Sure enough, engraved on a brass plate next to the door was "Authorized personnel only, Project Director Dr. Harold Jenkins." Becca stared at her grandfather's name, a chill running through her. This wasn't coincidence. Somehow, her grandfather had arranged for her to find this place, perhaps even orchestrated her interest in the property. "Frank," she said slowly, "how common is it for family members to inherit these keys, for facilities to be passed down through generations?" The elderly veteran shook his head. "Not common at all. These were government installations, not family heirlooms. The fact that your grandfather gave you that key and that you ended up owning this property, that's not standard procedure." The keypad beside the door had 10 numbered buttons and a small screen. On impulse, Becca tried her birth date. Nothing happened. Then she tried her grandfather's birth date, which she knew from family records. Still nothing. Tyler, who had been examining the area around the door, suddenly called out, "Mom, there's something here." a small compartment. Near the floor, almost hidden by shadows, was a small panel. When Becca pressed it, the panel slid open, revealing a dusty envelope with her name handwritten on the front. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a series of numbers and her grandfather's signature. At the top was written, "When you're ready to understand." The numbers appeared to be a code of some kind, perhaps for the keypad. Taking a deep breath, Becca entered the sequence. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the keypad emitted a soft tone, and the heavy door began to slide open automatically. The room beyond was larger than the others, a circular chamber with a central platform surrounded by workstations. But unlike the vintage technology in the rest of the facility, some of the equipment here looked remarkably advanced, almost modern. "This isn't standard Cold War technology," Frank said, his voice betraying rare surprise. "Some of this looks decades ahead of its time." On the central platform sat what appeared to be a sophisticated projector of some kind, surrounded by control panels with touch-sensitive surfaces that lit up as they approached. The walls were lined with screens and what looked like data storage, systems far more compact than anything from the 1960s. "What was my grandfather working on?" Becca murmured, approaching the central console. As her hand touched the surface, the entire system hummed to life. The screens around the room illuminated and the central projector activated, casting a three-dimensional holographic display into the air above the platform, a sight that should have been impossible for technology from that era. The hologram showed what appeared to be a complex molecular structure rotating slowly, with data flowing across it in patterns that reminded Becca of computer code. Below it, text appeared. "Project Prometheus, Phase 3, awaiting final authorization." "Mom," Tyler whispered, his earlier excitement replaced by awe. "I don't think this is about nuclear war at all." Frank moved closer to one of the screens, studying the information displayed there. "This goes well beyond communications monitoring or survivability planning. This is research. Advanced research." Becca felt a growing sense that they had stumbled onto something far more significant than a Cold War relic. The facility's purpose, her grandfather's role, the key left specifically for her. It all pointed to something deliberately preserved and protected, waiting to be rediscovered. As she leaned forward to examine the console more closely, her sleeve brushed against what appeared to be a sensor. Immediately, a new hologram appeared, this one showing her grandfather's face. It was a recording, but the three-dimensional quality made it seem as if he was standing before them. "Rebecca," the recording began, "if you're seeing this, you found your way to Willow Creek. Good. There's so much to explain, and I couldn't risk telling you while I lived. What you've discovered here isn't just a Cold War bunker, it's much more important." The hologram shifted, showing complex scientific data. Project Prometheus was officially a communications initiative, but its actual purpose was research into technologies decades beyond what the public knew existed. The work we did here, the discoveries we made, were too significant, too potentially world-altering to be controlled by any single government or military entity. Becca listened, transfixed, as her grandfather's recording continued, explaining how a small group of scientists had used the cover of Cold War security to pursue research that would have seemed impossible at the time. Advanced computing, energy, systems, even medical technologies that could revolutionize treatment of diseases previously considered incurable. When the project was scheduled for decommissioning, some of us couldn't bear to see the research abandoned. We arranged for the facility to appear decommissioned while actually placing it in a dormant state. The most sensitive materials remained, secure, waiting for the right time, a time when the world might be ready for what we discovered. The hologram of Harold Jenkins looked directly at Becca, as if he could see her across the decades. "I chose you, Rebecca, because you have both the scientific understanding and the moral compass to make the right decisions about this legacy. The key I gave you is more than just access to this facility. It's the responsibility for what happens next." As the recording ended, Becca became aware of a soft pulsing alarm from one of the workstations. A screen displayed a notification: "External security alert. Facility access detected. Protocol Omega initiated." Frank moved quickly to another console. "The facility's security systems are still active. They've detected our entry and have automatically alerted someone." "Who?" Becca asked, suddenly concerned. "The military? Local authorities?" Frank studied the display. "According to this, a notification has been sent to something called DARPA Oversight Division with our location coordinates." "Is that bad?" Tyler asked, picking up on the tension. "Not necessarily," Frank said carefully, "but it means we won't be the only ones who know about this facility for much longer." Becca thought quickly. Her grandfather's recording suggested he had deliberately preserved this research outside. Official channels had wanted her to find it before others did. But now that the security system had activated, what should they do? "How much time do we have?" she asked Frank. He shook his head. "Hard to say. If there's an active monitoring station for these alerts, and if they have personnel nearby, hours, maybe less." Becca turned to the central console, her mind racing. Her grandfather had trusted her with this discovery, with the decision about what happens next. She needed to understand what was here before anyone else arrived, needed to secure whatever knowledge her grandfather had deemed so important. "Tyler, take photos of everything, the maps, the equipment, the notes, anything that might help us understand what this place is. Frank, can you help me figure out how to download data from these systems? There might be a way to extract the research." As they worked frantically to document the facility, Becca couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. Her simple renovation project had uncovered something that would affect not just her life, but potentially many others. Her grandfather had prepared for this moment, had trusted her to make the right choices. 3 hours later, they heard vehicles approaching above. Multiple engines, the crunch of tires on gravel, the slam of car doors. Flashlight beams swept across the barn floor above, and authoritative voices called out as heavy footsteps moved toward the open hatch. Becca, Tyler, and Frank stood in the main operations center, surrounded by the evidence of extraordinary discoveries. They had managed to download significant data to a series of storage devices Frank had found in one of the workstations. They had photographed hundreds of documents, diagrams, and equipment layouts. They had learned enough to understand the magnitude of what they had found and why her grandfather had been so determined to preserve it. As the footsteps descended the spiral staircase, Becca took a deep breath and squared her shoulders. Whatever came next, she was prepared to protect her grandfather's legacy and the remarkable gifts he had left for the future. The single mom, who had just wanted to renovate an old barn, had become the guardian of something far more important, a responsibility she was now ready to accept. The heavy door to the operations center slid open, revealing a team of serious-looking individuals in dark suits, led by a woman who exuded authority despite her slight stature. "Ms. Martinez," the woman said, her tone professional but not unfriendly, "I'm Agent Diana Lawson, National Security Agency. We need to talk about what you found here and about your grandfather's work." Becca met her gaze steadily, the storage devices secure in her pocket. "Yes," she replied, "I believe we do." As Agent Diana Lawson stepped further into the operations center, 5 more agents filed in behind her. They wore tactical gear beneath their dark suits, and while they carried no visible weapons, their rigid postures suggested military training. The gleaming holographic display cast an ethereal blue glow across their faces, making the scene feel even more surreal to Becca. "Please remain calm," Agent Lawson said, her eyes quickly scanning the activated consoles. "We're not here to confiscate anything or cause problems. We simply need to secure this facility." Frank Wilson straightened his posture, the old military bearing returning automatically. "Ma'am, we discovered this facility during a routine renovation. The property belongs to Ms. Martinez. We've broken no laws." Agent Lawson nodded. "No one is suggesting otherwise, Mr. Wilson. Yes, we know who you are," she added, noting his surprise. "Former Staff Sergeant Frank Wilson, 10th Mountain Division, Honorable Discharge 1979. Your service record is exemplary." She turned to Becca. "And you, Ms. Martinez, MIT graduate, architectural engineering, former project lead at Brookfield Development before relocating here 8 months ago. Granddaughter of Dr. Harold Jenkins." The detailed knowledge of their backgrounds was unsettling. Tyler edged closer to his mother, and Becca placed a protective hand on his shoulder. "How long have you been monitoring us?" Becca asked. "We haven't been monitoring you specifically," Lawson replied, "but this facility is one of several that remain on our watch list. When the dormant security protocols activated 3 hours ago, it triggered an automatic alert. Given the nature of Project Prometheus, we dispatched a team immediately." One of the agents moved toward the central console, but Lawson raised a hand, stopping him. "Give them a moment. This is undoubtedly a shock." Becca appreciated the small courtesy. "My grandfather left me a message. He said the research conducted here was too important to be controlled by any single government entity." Something flickered across Lawson's face. Interest, perhaps concern. Did he elaborate on that? Somewhat. He mentioned advanced computing, energy systems, medical technologies. He said they continued the research secretly after the official decommissioning. Lawson exchanged glances with a silver-haired man who seemed to be her second in command. "That aligns with our limited records. Dr. Jenkins and his team were brilliant, perhaps too brilliant for the bureaucracy of their time. May I ask what else he told you?" Becca hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. The storage devices in her pocket contained data she hadn't even had time to examine. Her grandfather had trusted her with this legacy, not the government. "Ms. Martinez," Lawson said, seeming to sense her reluctance, "I understand your caution, but there are aspects of Project Prometheus that could be destabilizing if mishandled. We're not here to suppress your grandfather's work. Quite the opposite. We want to ensure it's properly understood and utilized." Frank cleared his throat. "If I may, what exactly is your authority here? This is private property, and whatever Dr. Jenkins left for his granddaughter seems to have been deliberately kept outside official channels." "A fair question," Lawson acknowledged. "Legally, the situation is complex. This facility was technically decommissioned in 1974, with ownership of the land returning fully to the Jenkins family. However, the research conducted here remained, classified under national security provisions that don't expire." She gestured to the holographic display. "The technologies you see here were decades ahead of their time when developed. Some still are. Our interest isn't in seizing control, but in responsible oversight." Becca studied the agent carefully. There was something in her manner that seemed genuine, a sincerity that didn't fit the stereotype of the heavy-handed government operative. "My grandfather entrusted this to me for a reason," Becca said finally. "I need to understand why before I can make any decisions about its future." Lawson nodded slowly. "Would it help if I told you I knew your grandfather?" This caught Becca by surprise. "You knew him? How? You don't seem old enough." A small smile crossed the agent's face. I'm older than I look. I was a junior analyst when Dr. Jenkins was consulting with our division in the early 2000s. He was long retired from his official positions by then, but still contributed to certain projects. He spoke about you occasionally, was quite proud of your academic achievements. The personal detail struck Becca. Her grandfather had never mentioned any continued government work after his retirement. How many secrets had he kept? If you knew him, Becca challenged, then you know he had concerns about government control of advanced technologies. He must have had reasons for setting things up this way. He did, Lawson agreed. Harold was a patriot, but also a humanist. He believed that truly transformative technologies should benefit all of humanity, not just serve national interests or corporate profits. She paused. That philosophy wasn't always popular in Washington. Tyler, who had been quietly absorbing everything, suddenly spoke up. Is that why this place is hidden? Because the government didn't agree with his ideas? Lawson regarded the 12-year-old with respect rather than condescension. That's a perceptive question, young man. The relationship between visionary scientists and the agencies that fund them is often complicated. Your great-grandfather found ways to navigate those complications while protecting what he believed was most important. The agent moved toward one of the side consoles, careful to telegraph her movements so as not to appear threatening. May I? She asked, gesturing to the controls. After Becca's cautious nod, Lawson entered a sequence into the console. The holographic display shifted, showing a new image, a complex molecular structure that rotated slowly above the platform. Project Prometheus wasn't one initiative but several, operating under a single classification umbrella, Lawson explained. The component you're seeing now was codenamed Asclepius, advanced medical research that Dr. Jenkins led personally. The molecule continued to rotate, its structure unlike anything Becca had seen in her engineering studies. What is it? She asked. A synthetic compound designed to repair cellular damage at the genetic level. Early trials showed promise for treating radiation poisoning, certain cancers, even degenerative neurological conditions. Lawson's voice had taken on a note of reverence. It was decades ahead of anything else in the field. If it was so promising, why wasn't it developed further? Frank asked, his skepticism evident. Lawson's expression darkened slightly. Politics, budget constraints, changes in administrative priorities. By the early 70s, the immediate threat of nuclear war had receded somewhat, and funding was redirected to more weapons-oriented research. Dr. Jenkins fought to continue the medical applications, but was overruled. She turned back to Becca. That's when we believe he and his core team began their parallel research program, officially winding down the project while secretly continuing their most promising work. The implications were staggering. For decades, potential medical breakthroughs might have been sitting dormant in this underground facility, while millions suffered from conditions they were designed to treat. There's more, Lawson continued, entering another sequence. The display changed again, showing what appeared to be an energy generation system unlike any conventional design. Project Helios, a clean energy technology that produces no waste and requires minimal fuel. The theoretical output was calculated to be 10 times more efficient than nuclear power without the radiation concerns. Tyler stepped closer to the hologram, his face illuminated by its glow. Why would anyone hide this? People need clean energy. The technology had dual-use potential, Lawson explained gently. The same principles that made it an efficient power source could theoretically be adapted for weapons development. Your great-grandfather was determined to prevent that application. Becca's mind was reeling. The significance of what her grandfather had preserved was far greater than she had imagined. potential solutions to some of humanity's most pressing problems, deliberately hidden to prevent misuse. "So what happens now?" she asked. "You've found the facility. What are your orders?" Lawson seemed to choose her words carefully. "Officially, we're tasked with securing any classified research and technology, but there's considerable debate within the agency about how best to approach Dr. Jenkins' legacy. Some advocate for immediate government control and classification. Others, myself included, believe there may be merit in his vision of more open development." The silver-haired man, who had remained silent until now, stepped forward. "Agent Lawson has some latitude in this matter, but I should be clear. We cannot simply walk away and leave technology of this significance unsecured. The potential national security implications are too substantial." "And who are you exactly?" Frank asked. "Deputy Director Collins, NSA Advanced Research Division." His tone was colder, more bureaucratic than Lawson's. "While Agent Lawson has operational authority here, I represent the agency's broader interests." The dynamic between the two agents was interesting. Clearly some internal disagreement about how to handle the situation. Becca decided to probe further. "What would my grandfather have wanted?" she asked Lawson directly. "You said you knew him." Lawson considered this. Harold was a complex man. He believed in serving his country, but also in serving humanity. He distrusted consolidation of power, whether governmental or corporate, I think. She paused, seemingly weighing her words. "I think he wanted these discoveries to be developed responsibly, with appropriate safeguards, but not monopolized or weaponized." "That's why he left it for Mom," Tyler said suddenly. "Because he trusted her to do the right thing." Lawson smiled at the boy. "I believe you're right. Dr. Jenkins was methodical in everything he did. If he arranged for your mother to find this facility, to have the key to access it, he must have had great confidence in her judgment." The compliment touched something deep in Becca. Her relationship with her grandfather had been loving, but somewhat distant. He had always seemed to carry the weight of secrets. Now she understood why. "I need time," Becca said finally. "Time to understand what's here, what my grandfather was trying to preserve, and what should happen next. This is too important for rushed decisions." Collins shook his head. "I'm afraid time is a luxury we don't have. Now that the facility is active, other interested parties may become aware of its existence. The technologies here are too sensitive to risk exposure." "What Deputy Director Collins means," Lawson interjected, shooting him a pointed look, "is that security is a legitimate concern. But," she turned back to Becca, "you're right that proper assessment can't be rushed. Perhaps we can find a middle path." "What are you suggesting?" Becca asked. "A joint assessment. You with whatever technical expertise you wish to bring in, working alongside our specialists to evaluate and catalog what's here. The facility remains secure, your property rights are respected, and we ensure nothing dangerous is overlooked." Collins looked like he wanted to object, but remained silent. Frank stepped closer to Becca, speaking quietly. "It might be the best option. They could force the issue through national security channels if they wanted to. This way, you maintain some control." Becca thought about her grandfather's message, that he had chosen her because of both her technical understanding and her moral compass. If he had trusted her to make these decisions, she needed to honor that trust by making them carefully. "3 conditions," she said, addressing Lawson. "First, I have final say over any public disclosures about the medical and energy technologies. Second, I want legal documentation acknowledging my ownership of this property and the discoveries contained here. Third, any research teams include members I personally approve." Collins started to protest, but Lawson raised a hand to stop him. Those are reasonable conditions, Ms. Martinez. I believe we can accommodate them, with some caveats regarding truly national security-sensitive materials. She extended her hand. Do we have an agreement, at least in principle? Becca glanced at Tyler, who nodded encouragingly, then at Frank, who gave a slight shrug that suggested it was as good as they were likely to get. In principle, Becca agreed, shaking Lawson's hand, but I reserve the right to reconsider if I feel the spirit of this agreement isn't being honored. Fair enough, Lawson replied. Now perhaps we should begin a more systematic documentation of what's here. I suspect we've only scratched the surface of Dr. Jenkins' legacy. The next several hours passed in a blur of activity. More NSA personnel arrived, including technical specialists, who began carefully examining the various systems throughout the facility. Becca, Tyler, and Frank remained present throughout, ensuring nothing was removed without documentation. As the night deepened, Becca found herself in a quiet conversation with Agent Lawson in what appeared to have been a small conference room. The walls were lined with faded technical diagrams, and a coffee cup still sat on the table, preserved as if its owner had just stepped out momentarily. Your grandfather was considered something of a maverick, Lawson said, looking at the diagrams. Brilliant, unquestionably, but troublesome to administrators. He refused to compartmentalize his thinking the way military research demands. What do you mean? Becca asked. Most classified research is fragmented. Each scientist works on their specific component without understanding the whole. It prevents any individual from having too complete a picture. Harold rejected that approach. He insisted that his team understand the context and implications of their work. Lawson picked up the preserved coffee cup, examining it with a faint smile. This was his, you know. He was notorious for leaving coffee cups everywhere. The joke was that you could track Dr. Jenkins's movements through the facility by following the trail of half-empty mugs. The personal anecdote made Becca's grandfather seem suddenly more real, more human than the legendary figure who had left her this extraordinary inheritance. Why didn't he ever tell me about any of this? Becca asked, the question that had been nagging at her since they discovered the facility. Lawson set the cup down carefully. Security protocols, partly. But I think it was more than that. I think he wanted to protect you, give you the freedom to live your life without the burden of these secrets until you were ready for them. And how did he know when I would be ready? The property, Lawson said simply. Willow Creek Farm came on the market several times over the decades. You're the first family member who showed interest in it. Perhaps that was his test, whether you would be drawn to this place even without knowing what it contained. Before Becca could respond, Tyler appeared in the doorway, excitement evident on his face despite the late hour. Mom, Mr. Wilson found something else, another hidden room. They followed Tyler back to the main corridor, where Frank and several agents stood before what had appeared to be a solid wall. Now, a panel had slid aside, revealing another passageway. It was completely concealed, Frank explained. One of the NSA technicians noticed an anomaly in the thermal readings. This section was slightly warmer than the surrounding walls. Beyond the hidden door lay a small personal office. Unlike the institutional feel of the rest of the facility, this room had wooden bookshelves, a comfortable chair, and photographs on the desk. It was clearly Harold Jenkins's private space, a sanctuary within the secret installation. We haven't touched anything, Lawson assured Becca. This should be yours to explore first. Becca entered the office slowly, taking in the details. The books on the shelves covered diverse subjects, technical volumes on genetics and physics, alongside philosophy, ethics, and classical literature. The photographs showed family moments, including several of Becca as a child. On the desk lay a leather-bound journal with "For Rebecca" written on its cover. in her grandfather's distinctive handwriting. With trembling fingers, she opened it. Inside was not a traditional journal, but a series of letters dated across decades, addressed to her, but never sent. The earliest was from 1972, when she was not yet born. The latest was dated just 3 months before her grandfather's death. The first page contained a brief introduction. My dearest Rebecca, if you're reading this, you've found your way to Willow Creek and discovered what lies beneath. I've written these letters over the years, recording my thoughts about the work we did here and my hopes for its future. I couldn't share this burden with you during my lifetime, but I've always believed that someday you would be the right guardian for what we created. The discoveries preserved in this facility represent possibilities that could transform human existence, for better or worse, depending on who controls them and to what purpose they're applied. I've spent decades ensuring they remained hidden until the right moment and the right person could bring them to light. That person is you, Rebecca, not because you are my granddaughter, but because I've watched you grow into someone with both the intelligence to understand these technologies and the wisdom to deploy them responsibly. Read these letters when you're ready. They contain not just technical explanations, but my reflections on the moral and philosophical questions that have haunted me throughout this journey. With love and faith in you, your grandfather, Harold. Tears welled in Becca's eyes as she gently closed the journal. Whatever expectations she had when beginning her barn renovation, nothing could have prepared her for this responsibility, this legacy that spanned generations and potentially held solutions to humanity's most pressing challenges. He left you more than just technology, Lawson said softly from the doorway. He left you his wisdom. Becca nodded, carefully placing the journal in her bag. And now I need to decide what to do with it. As dawn approached, the initial assessment of the facility was complete enough for preliminary decisions. The NSA team had documented the major systems and secured the perimeter, installing discrete monitoring equipment to prevent unauthorized access. In the barn above, no sign remained of the government presence. The vehicles had been moved to a staging area in the woods behind the property, invisible from the road or neighboring farms. To any casual observer, Willow Creek Farm appeared unchanged, just another rural Vermont property undergoing renovation. Becca, Tyler, and Frank gathered with Agent Lawson and Deputy Director Collins in the main operations center for a final conference before departing. Despite the all-night activity, Lawson seemed remarkably fresh, while Collins showed the strain more visibly, his irritation evident as he checked his watch repeatedly. "Here's where we stand," Lawson began. "We've identified 3 major research initiatives within Project Prometheus. The medical applications we discussed earlier, the clean energy technology, and an advanced computational system that appears to be the forerunner of modern quantum computing." She gestured to the holographic display, which now showed a complex organizational chart. All 3 initiatives were interconnected, designed to complement each other. The computational system was needed to model the molecular structures for the medical research. The energy technology powered the intensive computational needs. "What's your assessment of potential applications?" Becca asked. "Preliminary, but promising," Lawson replied. "The medical research could revolutionize treatment for several currently incurable conditions. The energy technology could address climate concerns while meeting growing global power demands. The computational advances could accelerate research across countless fields." "And weapons?" Frank asked bluntly. Collins shifted uncomfortably, but Lawson answered directly. "Dual-use potential exists in all 3 areas. The medical research could theoretically be modified to target specific genetic profiles. The energy technology could be weaponized. The computational systems could break any existing encryption, compromising global security infrastructures. Which is precisely why this can't remain in private hands," Collins interjected. "The national security implications are too significant." "And yet," Lawson countered, "Dr. Jenkins deliberately kept these technologies outside conventional channels. He must have had reasons for distrusting centralized control." The tension between the two NSA officials was palpable. Clearly, they represented different philosophies within the agency, perhaps different factions competing for influence over how the discovery would be handled. Becca thought about the journal in her bag, the decades of her grandfather's reflections on exactly these questions. "I need time to review my grandfather's personal records before any final decisions are made," she said firmly. "The immediate security concerns have been addressed," Lawson agreed. "The facility is monitored, access is controlled, and nothing will be removed without proper documentation and authorization." Collins clearly wanted to object, but seemed to recognize he was outnumbered. "I'll need to brief the director by noon. This situation exceeds standard protocols." "Of course," Lawson said smoothly. "I'll accompany you for the briefing. Ms. Martinez will need to establish formal channels of communication and develop a more comprehensive agreement regarding access and research protocols." "I'd like Frank to be part of those discussions," Becca said. "His military background and understanding of security considerations will be valuable." Frank looked surprised, but nodded his agreement. "Happy to help if I can." "A sensible choice," Lawson approved. "Now I suggest we all get some rest. It's been a long night and the coming days will require clear thinking." As they prepared to leave the facility, Becca took one last look around the operations center at the technology her grandfather and his team had preserved, at the legacy now entrusted to her care. The weight of responsibility was enormous, but also strangely energizing. Tyler came to stand beside her, his young face serious. "What happens now, Mom?" "Now we learn," she said, putting an arm around his shoulders. "We learn everything we can about what Grandpa Harold was trying to do, and then we figure out how to honor his vision." "Do you trust them?" he asked, nodding toward Lawson and Collins, who were engaged in a tense conversation near the exit. "Agent Lawson, possibly," Becca replied quietly. "She seems to understand what my grandfather was trying to achieve. The others, we'll have to see." Lo! As they ascended the spiral staircase, leaving the secret facility beneath the barn, Becca felt a strange sense of coming full circle. What had begun as a simple renovation project, an attempt to build a new life after her divorce, had become something far more significant. Her grandfather had chosen her as the guardian of his legacy, believing she had both the technical understanding and moral compass to make the right decisions. Now, she needed to prove him right. The morning sunlight streamed through the barn's weathered boards as they emerged, casting golden patterns across the excavated area where it had all begun. The metal hatch now lay closed once more, its surface concealed by a temporary platform that the NSA team had constructed to hide its existence. Frank paused at the barn door, looking back at the hidden entrance. "You know, in all my years in the military, I heard rumors about secret installations like this. Most of us thought they were just stories, the stuff of conspiracy theories." "And now?" Becca asked. He shook his head, a mixture of wonder and concern in his weathered face. "Now I wonder what else is out there, buried and waiting. Your grandfather wasn't the only scientist with ideas ahead of his time, or concerns about how those ideas might be used." As they stepped outside into the crisp Vermont morning, the property looked unchanged. The white farmhouse with its blue shutters, the barn with its partially completed renovations, the rolling fields beyond. But Becca knew that everything had changed. Beneath the tranquil surface of Willow Creek Farm lay discoveries that could transform the world, for better or worse. The government vehicles departed discreetly, leaving no trace of the night's activities. Agent Lawson was the last to leave, pausing beside her car to address Becca one final time. "Dr. Jenkins spoke about you often during our collaborations," she said. "He believed you had inherited not just his intellect, but his ethical framework, his ability to see beyond immediate applications to longer-term implications." "I hope he was right," Becca replied. "I'm going to need that perspective to navigate what comes next." Lawson handed her a secure phone. "This is a direct line to me. Use it if you have questions or concerns, or if you discover anything in your grandfather's records that you feel I should know immediately." After the agent departed, Becca, Tyler, and Frank returned to the farmhouse. Despite the exhaustion of their all-night exploration, none of them felt ready to sleep. Too much had happened. Too many revelations had upended their understanding of the world. In the kitchen, as Frank prepared coffee and Tyler rummaged for breakfast, Becca placed her grandfather's journal on the table. The morning light illuminated its worn leather cover. The simple inscription, "For Rebecca," a bridge across time and secrets. Whatever happened next, she knew that the answers would begin here, with her grandfather's own words, his explanation of why he had created this extraordinary legacy and what he hoped it would become. The single mom who had just wanted to renovate an old barn now found herself at the center of something that could change the course of human history. As she opened the journal to the first entry, dated June 17, 1972, Becca couldn't help but wonder, had her grandfather somehow foreseen this moment? Had he known that decades after concealing his discoveries, the perfect confluence of events would bring her to this property, to that barn, to the secrets hidden beneath? The first words on the page seemed to answer her question. "Rebecca, I write this knowing you won't read it for many years, perhaps not in my lifetime. But some insights are meant to wait for their moment, like seeds beneath winter snow. What we've discovered here at Willow Creek is too important, too transformative to release into a world not yet ready to use it wisely. So, I've made a choice that some would call presumptuous, to preserve these discoveries for a future time when the right hands might guide them toward their highest purpose. I believe those hands will be yours." 3 days after the discovery of the secret facility beneath her barn, Becca sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by stacks of documents and several laptops. The morning sun streamed through the farmhouse, windows illuminating her grandfather's journal, which lay open beside a mug of cooling coffee. Outside, a perimeter of unmarked vehicles and agents, discreetly positioned to appear as construction equipment and workers, secured the property from unwanted attention. Becca rubbed her tired eyes, having spent most of the night reviewing the materials her grandfather had left for her. The journal entries spanned decades, detailing not just the scientific breakthroughs of Project Prometheus, but the ethical dilemmas, political struggles, and personal sacrifices that had accompanied them. With each page, she gained a deeper understanding of her grandfather, not just as a brilliant scientist, but as a man wrestling with the profound implications of his work. Tyler appeared in the kitchen doorway, his hair tousled from sleep. Despite the extraordinary circumstances, Becca had insisted he maintain some normalcy, attending school for the past 2 days while she navigated the initial stages of their new reality. "Morning, Mom," he yawned, heading straight for the refrigerator. "Any new world-changing discoveries today?" His attempt at casual humor made her smile. "Just trying to understand the ones we've already found. How did you sleep?" "Weird dreams about underground cities and glowing molecules," Tyler admitted, pouring cereal into a bowl. "Is Mr. Wilson coming over again today?" "He'll be here at 9. Agent Lawson is bringing the technical team to begin the comprehensive assessment." She checked her watch, "which means I need to shower and look somewhat professional in the next 45 minutes. Tyler sat across from her, studying. The documents spread across the table. Do you think Grandpa Harold really figured out how to cure cancer? Becca considered the question carefully. Her son deserved honesty, but she was still sorting scientific fact from theoretical possibility. The research suggests he was on a promising path. Whether it was fully developed into viable treatments, that's what we're trying to determine. Is that why Agent Collins was arguing with Agent Lawson yesterday? Because of how important this could be? Becca hadn't realized Tyler had overheard the tense conversation between the two NSA officials in the driveway. Deputy Director Collins had returned with additional personnel, clearly attempting to exert more direct control over the investigation. Agent Lawson had firmly but politely redirected his efforts, citing their agreement with Becca. They have different perspectives on how to handle Grandpa's discoveries, she explained diplomatically. Agent Lawson seems to respect his intentions. Director Collins is more focused on government protocols. I like Agent Lawson better, Tyler declared, spooning cereal into his mouth. She treats us like we matter. The simple observation aligned with Becca's own impressions. In the days since the initial discovery, Diana Lawson had demonstrated unusual respect for the Martinez family's position. She'd shared information openly, included Becca in all significant discussions, and insisted that Tyler be treated as a stakeholder rather than a child to be managed. By contrast, Deputy Director Collins made no effort to hide his view that the entire operation should be transferred to a secure government facility, with Becca granted only limited access to her grandfather's work. The power struggle between the two NSA officials had become increasingly evident, with Lawson apparently winning the initial rounds. She's definitely more aligned with your great-grandfather's philosophy, Becca agreed, closing the journal as a vehicle crunched up the gravel driveway. Through the kitchen window, she watched Frank Wilson's pickup truck park beside the porch. The retired veteran had become an unexpected ally, his military experience and straightforward manner providing valuable perspective as she navigated the complex situation. Becca appreciated that he spoke plainly when government officials retreated into jargon and bureaucratic language. Frank entered without knocking, as had become their habit over the past few days. He carried a cardboard box filled with old newspapers and manila folders. "Morning," he greeted them, setting the box on a kitchen chair. "Found these in my attic. Local news reports from the 60s and 70s about unusual activity around Pinewood Valley. Thought they might provide some context." "Any mention of Willow Creek Farm specifically?" Becca asked, intrigued. "Nothing direct, but there are articles about power usage spikes, unusual supply deliveries, government vehicles. People noticed things, even if they didn't know what they were seeing." He pulled out a yellowed newspaper. This one from '69 mentions repeated unusual electromagnetic disturbances affecting television reception in the area. Tyler looked up from his cereal. "Like how our phones wouldn't work near the hatch." "Exactly," Frank nodded. "The technology down there has a distinctive electromagnetic signature. People would have noticed the effects even if they couldn't identify the cause." Becca began sorting through the collected news clippings, adding them to her growing research pile. "This helps establish a timeline. We can correlate these reports with the dates in my grandfather's journal." The sound of additional vehicles approaching drew their attention outside. A convoy of 3 unmarked black SUVs rolled up the driveway, followed by what appeared to be a utility truck, but was almost certainly filled with specialized equipment. "Our government friends have arrived," Frank observed dryly. "In force, I see." Becca stood, straightening her sweater. "Tyler, remember what we discussed. You can observe and ask questions, but follow all safety protocols. And if anything makes you uncomfortable, you tell me immediately." "I know, Mom. Don't touch anything glowy, don't wander off alone, and always wear the radiation badge thing they gave us." He rolled his eyes with the particular theatrical flair of pre-teens everywhere. As Becca opened the front door, Agent Lawson was already approaching the porch, wearing practical field clothing rather than her previous formal attire. Behind her, a team of technicians began unloading equipment from the vehicles. "Good morning, Ms. Martinez," Lawson greeted her. "I've brought the specialists we discussed. Dr. Eliza Chen heads our quantum computing division, Dr. Patel is our leading geneticist, and Commander Roberts oversees energy systems research." 3 individuals nodded in greeting. A petite Asian woman with intense eyes, a tall Indian man with a carefully trimmed beard, and an African-American man with the unmistakable bearing of career military. "Welcome to Willow Creek Farm," Becca said, stepping aside to let them enter. "This is my son Tyler and our neighbor Frank Wilson, who's been assisting us." Dr. Chen smiled warmly at Tyler. "I understand you were part of the original discovery team. Very impressive for someone your age." Tyler straightened, visibly pleased at being addressed as a peer rather than a child. "I just helped my mom. She's the one who figured out the key." "Speaking of which," Lawson interjected, "we've completed the preliminary analysis of that brass key. It's quite remarkable. The internal mechanisms are unlike anything in our reference databases." "Another of my grandfather's innovations?" Becca asked. "Possibly. The material composition includes several rare metals in unusual combinations. We believe it contains a unique electromagnetic signature that interacts with the facility's security systems." Lawson handed Becca a folder. "The full technical assessment is here, though some sections remain classified." Frank raised an eyebrow at this last comment. "Seems odd to classify information about a key that Ms. Martinez already owns." Lawson acknowledged the point with a slight incline of her head. "Government habit, Mr. Wilson. We tend to classify first and declassify later. I'm working on expediting the review process." This small admission that she was actively working to increase transparency rather than restrict information reinforced Becca's growing trust in Agent Lawson. Whatever agency politics were at play, Lawson appeared to be genuinely committed to honoring the spirit of their agreement. "Shall we proceed to the facility?" Dr. Patel suggested, adjusting his glasses. "I'm particularly eager to examine the Asclepius molecular databases. If the preliminary data is accurate, Dr. Jenkins may have developed synthesizing techniques decades ahead of current capabilities." The group moved toward the barn, the technical specialists discussing hypotheses and methodologies in the specialized language of their respective fields. Becca listened carefully, her engineering background allowing her to follow the broad concepts, if not every scientific detail. As they approached the concealed hatch, now hidden beneath what appeared to be construction materials, but was actually a sophisticated access system installed by the NSA team, Becca noticed a dark sedan, parked at the far edge of the property. Deputy Director Collins stood beside it, speaking intensely into a secure phone. "Your colleague seems concerned," she noted to Lawson. The agent followed her gaze and sighed slightly. "Deputy Director Collins reports directly to the National Security Council. He has broader considerations than our immediate research objectives." "Political considerations?" Frank asked bluntly. "Let's just say that revolutionary technologies create interest at the highest levels of government." Lawson's diplomatic response didn't quite mask her evident frustration with the situation. The entrance to the underground facility had been significantly modified over the past 3 days. The crude excavation had been replaced with a properly constructed access point, complete with security measures and environmental controls. The star-shaped keyhole remained central to the system. The NSA technicians had been unable to bypass it, confirming that Becca's brass key contained security. elements they couldn't replicate. As before, Becca used the key to activate the entrance sequence. The technical specialists watched with professional fascination as the complex mechanisms engaged, the hatch rising smoothly to reveal the spiral staircase beyond. "Remarkable engineering," Commander Roberts murmured. "The power systems must have independent sustainability to maintain functionality after all these decades." They descended into the facility, the blue emergency lighting automatically brightening as they reached the bottom of the staircase. The main corridor appeared unchanged since their first exploration, the same ambient hum permeating the air. "We've established temporary workstations in each of the main research areas," Lawson explained, leading them toward the central operations center. "Dr. Chen will focus on the computational systems, Dr. Patel on the medical applications, and Commander Roberts on the energy technology." And what will you be focusing on, Agent Lawson?" Frank asked. "Coordination and security," she replied smoothly. "My role is to ensure productive collaboration while maintaining appropriate protocols." The central operations chamber had been transformed from the mysterious space they'd first encountered into something resembling a high-tech research laboratory. Additional equipment had been installed alongside the original systems, and several workstations now ringed the central platform where the holographic display continued to pulse with its ethereal blue light. Dr. Chen immediately moved to the main console, her fingers dancing across the controls with evident familiarity. "We've managed to interface with about 60% of the original systems so far. The architecture is unlike anything in our current reference models. It appears to use quantum principles that weren't theoretically formalized until decades after this facility was constructed. My grandfather mentions non-linear computational frameworks in his journal," Becca offered. "He describes using what he called probability states instead of traditional binary processing." Dr. Chen looked up sharply. "May I see those journal entries?" That terminology suggests he was working with quantum computing principles before the field even had a name. Becca hesitated, protective of her grandfather's personal writings. "Some of the entries contain personal reflections. I'd prefer to extract the relevant technical information separately." "Of course," Chen agreed, respecting the boundary. "Any insights you can share would be valuable. We're essentially trying to reverse engineer decades of theoretical development." Tyler, who had been quietly observing, suddenly pointed toward a section of the wall where a previously unnoticed panel had begun to glow faintly. "What's that doing?" Everyone turned to look as the panel illuminated more brightly, revealing what appeared to be a handprint scanner of some kind. "That wasn't active during our initial survey," Lawson said, frowning. "The system seems to be waking up progressively as we interact with it." Becca approached the glowing panel cautiously. "It's responding to our presence, or perhaps to specific keywords or activities. My grandfather designed this facility to reveal itself in stages." "A security measure," Commander Roberts suggested, "ensuring that only those with the proper knowledge could access deeper functions." "Or a teaching method," Dr. Patel countered, "introducing complex concepts sequentially after foundational understanding is established." The panel continued to glow, its soft blue light pulsing in a rhythm that somehow felt inviting rather than threatening. Intuitively, Becca reached toward it. "Ms. Martinez, we should scan for potential hazards before direct contact," Lawson cautioned. "It's okay," Becca said with unexpected certainty. "This is meant for me." She placed her palm against the glowing panel. The surface felt warm and seemed to vibrate slightly beneath her touch. For a moment, nothing else happened. Then a gentle scanning light moved beneath her hand, and the panel emitted a soft chime of confirmation. "DNA recognition," Dr. Patel murmured. keyed to genetic markers shared with Dr. Jenkins. The wall beside the panel slid open, revealing a previously hidden chamber. Unlike the institutional design of the main facility, this room had warm lighting and wooden furnishings. It appeared to be a private research space, more personal and comfortable than the government-designed areas. My grandfather's private laboratory, Becca realized, stepping inside. The room contained a desk with an old-fashioned typewriter, bookshelves filled with technical volumes and personal mementos, and what appeared to be custom-built research equipment. Most notably, an old photograph hung prominently on the wall, Harold Jenkins standing beside a much younger man, both wearing lab coats and smiling at the camera. They stood in what appeared to be this very room, though the equipment behind them looked newer. "Is that your father?" Tyler asked, pointing to the younger man in the photograph. Becca shook her head, studying the image more closely. "No, I don't recognize him." She turned to Lawson. "Do your records identify my grandfather's research partners?" The agent examined the photograph with interest. "We have partial personnel files, but they're incomplete. Many of the scientists who worked on classified projects used code names or were documented separately for security reasons." Frank had moved to examine the bookshelves. "Some of these volumes aren't in English," he noted. "Russian, German, and I think that's Sanskrit." Dr. Chen had approached the custom equipment. "In the corner, this appears to be a prototype quantum entanglement device," she said, her voice reverent. "The theories for this weren't even published until the 1990s. "Look at the dates on these research notes," Dr. Patel added, carefully examining papers. On the desk, 1973, 1974, 1975, long after the official project was supposedly decommissioned. Becca felt a growing sense of awe. Her grandfather had continued his research here in secret for years, perhaps decades, advancing scientific understanding far beyond what was publicly known. And he had prepared this room, protected by DNA recognition, knowing that someday she might find it. A leather-bound notebook sat prominently in the center of the desk, similar to the journal Becca had found in the other hidden room, but smaller and more worn. Opening it, she found pages of technical diagrams, interspersed with personal observations, all written in her grandfather's distinctive handwriting. The first page contained a simple message. "For Rebecca, this room contains my most important work, separated from government oversight. The medical applications in particular must be protected from weaponization. Trust your instincts about who should have access to these discoveries." Harold. He created a partition, Becca realized. The main facility contains what he was. Willing to share with the government eventually, this room holds what he wanted to keep separate. Research he believed needed different handling. Lawson frowned slightly. "That's highly irregular. All research conducted under Project Prometheus would technically be government property." "Is it government property if it was conducted after official decommissioning using privately developed methods on what was then private land?" Frank challenged. "Seems to me Dr. Jenkins carefully created a legal distinction." Before Lawson could respond, Tyler called from the far corner of the room. "Mom, there's something else here." He stood beside what appeared to be an old-fashioned film projector connected to a small viewing screen. The device was unlike standard projection equipment, incorporating elements that looked more advanced than its vintage exterior suggested. A film canister sat beside it, labeled simply "Contingency." "May I?" Becca asked her son, who stepped aside. The projector seemed to be in working order despite its age. After examining it briefly, Becca loaded the film and switched on the device. Rather than projecting onto a wall, the machine displayed the footage on its integrated screen, another innovation that seemed ahead of its time. The film quality was remarkably clear. It showed Harold Jenkins, appearing to be in his 60s, seated at the very desk now in front of them. He looked directly into the camera, creating the uncanny impression that he was looking at them across the decades. If you're viewing this recording, Rebecca, then you've found not just the facility, but this private research space. I've designed the security systems to recognize your DNA specifically. No one else in our family line would trigger the recognition protocols. Her grandfather's voice was stronger than Becca remembered from his later years, filled with the confidence of a man in his intellectual prime. By now, you've likely encountered government representatives. They have legitimate security concerns, but their institutional perspective inevitably prioritizes national interests over humanitarian ones. This has always been our point of philosophical divergence. On screen, Harold adjusted his glasses, a gesture Becca remembered well from her childhood. The research preserved in this room represents the most promising medical applications. We developed treatments for conditions that continue to cause immense human suffering. I've deliberately separated these discoveries from the main facility because I believe they should be deployed based on humanitarian need rather than political or economic considerations. He leaned forward, his expression intensifying. The molecular compounds documented in these files can potentially treat several forms of cancer, neurodegenerative diseases, and certain congenital conditions. The synthesis methods are fully documented, designed to be implementable with technology available decades after my time. I entrust you with determining how these treatments should be developed and distributed. The film continued for several more minutes, with Harold providing specific guidance about the research materials and their potential applications. He concluded with a personal message that brought tears to Becca's eyes. I've watched you grow into a woman of both exceptional intelligence and profound compassion, qualities essential for the responsibility I've placed in your hands. Whatever you decide about this legacy, know that I trust your judgment completely. You were always the one I was waiting for. As the recording ended, the room fell silent. Even the NSA specialist seemed moved by the personal nature of the message, the decades-long plan that had culminated in this moment. Lawson was the first to speak. Ms. Martinez, this presents complications for our agreement. How so? Becca asked, though she already anticipated the issue. The research in this room wasn't included in our initial assessment. Technically, we should document and secure everything, but Lawson paused, appearing to choose her words carefully. Your grandfather created a deliberate separation. Respecting that intention would require a different approach. Are you suggesting we keep this discovery from your superiors? Frank asked, his tone neutral, but his expression skeptical. Not exactly, Lawson replied. But perhaps we can establish a different protocol for this specific content. One that honors Dr. Jenkins's intentions while addressing legitimate security concerns. Becca studied the agent thoughtfully. Lawson seemed to be offering a compromise that bent bureaucratic rules, a risky professional position that suggested genuine commitment to the ethical considerations at play. What do you propose? Becca asked. A separate research track with more limited access. The medical applications would be evaluated by trusted specialists, Dr. Patel and perhaps 2 others with appropriate expertise. The findings would be reported directly to you with recommendations for potential development pathways. And the government's role? Frank pressed. Advisory rather than controlling, Lawson said, with appropriate safety protocols to prevent misuse or weaponization, as Dr. Jenkins feared. Dr. Patel stepped forward. If I may, this approach aligns with standard ethical frameworks in medical research. Revolutionary treatments are typically developed through independent research institutions with regulatory oversight, not direct government control. Commander Roberts frowned. "Agent Lawson, this exceeds your authorization. Deputy Director Collins would never approve such an arrangement." "Then perhaps we don't present it to the Deputy Director immediately," Lawson replied, her tone making it clear she understood the professional risk she was taking. "Ms. Martinez has legitimate ownership claims to this specific research. We can establish appropriate protocols while the legal framework is being determined." The subtext was clear. Lawson was proposing to temporarily withhold information from her superiors, creating space for Becker to assess the medical research before it became entangled in government bureaucracy and potential classification. "Why would you do this?" Becker asked directly. "Why risk your position?" Lawson's expression softened slightly. "I knew your grandfather, as I mentioned. He was right about many things, including the institutional limitations of government. Agencies, when dealing with transformative technologies, sometimes the correct approach isn't found in procedural manuals." Tyler, who had been quietly absorbing the adult conversation, suddenly spoke up. "She's doing what Grandpa Harold wanted, making sure the medicine helps people instead of becoming a weapon." The simple clarity of the 12-year-old's assessment seemed to resonate with everyone in the room. Even Commander Roberts, despite his evident discomfort with circumventing official channels, nodded slightly in acknowledgement. "We would need to move quickly," Dr. Chen noted. "Deputy Director Collins will eventually insist on a complete inventory of the facility." "I can buy us perhaps 72 hours, Lawson agreed. "Enough time for Dr. Patel to conduct a preliminary assessment of the medical research and for Ms. Martinez to review the materials her grandfather left specifically for her." The moment felt pivotal, a decision point with potentially far-reaching consequences. Becca thought about her grandfather's trust in her judgment, about the responsibility he had placed in her hands across decades. She thought about Tyler and the world he would inherit, about the suffering that might be alleviated by the knowledge preserved in this room. "All right," she decided. "We establish a separate research track for the medical applications, with Dr. Patel leading the initial assessment. I want complete documentation of everything, secured independently from the main project files." She turned to Lawson. "And I want your word that you'll inform me immediately if your position becomes untenable. I won't have you sacrificing your career without fair warning." Lawson nodded, a hint of respect in her expression. "Agreed. Though, I should note that my interest isn't entirely altruistic. If these medical treatments are as revolutionary as they appear, ensuring they reach those who need them serves everyone's interests, including the government's, whether they recognize it immediately or not." As they began organizing the materials, in the private laboratory, Becca felt a strange sense of destiny fulfilled. Her grandfather had set these events in motion decades ago, arranging for her to discover not just the facility, but this specific room with its carefully preserved knowledge. He had trusted her to navigate the complex ethical and practical challenges of bringing these discoveries into the world. Standing in this room where her grandfather had worked in secret, surrounded by knowledge that could transform countless lives, Becca Martinez, who had begun this journey simply hoping to renovate an old barn and build a new life for herself and her son, now found herself entrusted with shaping the future of medical science itself. The weight of that responsibility was enormous, but as she caught Tyler's eye across the room, she felt equal to the task. Her grandfather had chosen her because he believed she possessed both the intelligence to understand these discoveries and the moral compass to deploy them wisely. Now it was time to prove him right. The clock struck midnight as Becca sat alone in her grandfather's hidden laboratory, surrounded by decades of revolutionary research. The main underground facility had been cleared hours ago, the NSA team reluctantly departing after a full day of intensive analysis. Only Agent Lawson remained above ground, maintaining a discreet security presence while giving Becca the privacy she needed to fully absorb her grandfather's legacy. The promised 72-hour window was rapidly shrinking. Tomorrow morning, Deputy Director Collins would arrive with a specialized extraction team determined to relocate the most sensitive research to a government facility despite their prior agreement. The political winds had shifted in Washington. News of a potential medical breakthrough had reached ears too powerful to ignore, and Collins had received new directives that overrode Agent Lawson's authority. Becca needed to make decisions tonight that would shape not just her future, but potentially the future of global medicine. The responsibility felt almost crushing. "You look like you could use this." Frank Wilson's voice broke through her thoughts as he descended the spiral staircase carrying 2 steaming mugs. Despite the late hour, the retired veteran showed no signs of fatigue. "Is that actual coffee, or the freeze-dried stuff from the emergency supplies?" Becca asked, managing a tired smile. "Real coffee. Your son is finally asleep, by the way. Found him trying to teach himself quantum physics on that laptop of his." Frank handed her a mug and settled into a chair across from her. "Making any headway?" Becca gestured to the organized piles of research she'd spent hours sorting. "More than I expected. My grandfather was extraordinarily methodical. He documented everything, not just the scientific processes, but the ethical reasoning behind each decision." "And the medical breakthroughs? Are they as significant as everyone believes?" She nodded slowly. "Based on Dr. Patel's assessment and my own review, yes. The molecular compounds he developed could revolutionize treatment for several currently incurable conditions. The synthesis methods are complex but implementable with modern technology." Frank studied her troubled expression. "That should be good news. Why do you look like you're attending a funeral instead of a breakthrough?" "Because tomorrow morning, all of this gets locked away in some government vault," Becca replied, frustration edging her voice. "Classified, compartmentalized, developed according to political priorities rather than medical needs." "Unless you have an alternative," Frank suggested, his tone careful but meaningful. Becca met his gaze directly. "What exactly are you proposing, Frank?" The retired soldier took a measured sip of his coffee before answering. "I've spent 40 years watching how the government handles sensitive assets. They'll study this, research for a decade before deploying anything. And when they do, the primary applications will align with military and intelligence priorities." "Agent Lawson seems different," Becca countered, though without much conviction. "Lawson is one decent person in a massive bureaucracy. Her intentions are good, but her authority has limits, as we've already seen with Collins' new orders." Frank leaned forward. "Your grandfather went to extraordinary lengths to keep this research outside government control. He chose you specifically to make these decisions." The weight of that trust had been Becca's constant companion since discovering the facility. Harold Jenkins had orchestrated an elaborate, decades-spanning plan to ensure his most important work would find its way to her. Not to the government, not to a corporation, but to his granddaughter specifically. "I've been studying the synthesis documents," she said after a long pause. "The compounds themselves are complex, but the production methodology is surprisingly elegant. With the right equipment, a competent biochemist could reproduce the process." Frank raised an eyebrow. "Are you considering what I think you're considering?" "I'm considering what my grandfather would want," Becca replied carefully. "He believed these medical advances should benefit humanity broadly, not be controlled by any single entity." She stood and moved to a locked cabinet she had discovered earlier that day. Using a small key found in her grandfather's desk, She opened it to reveal several sealed containers and a thick binder of documentation. He prepared contingency measures, Becker explained. This cabinet contains physical samples of the core compounds, detailed synthesis instructions, and comprehensive research notes, all duplicated from the main files. Frank whistled softly. Harold Jenkins was playing a very long game. He knew the government might eventually find this facility. These duplicates were his insurance policy. Becca ran her fingers over the sealed containers. The question is, what do I do with them? The ethical dimensions were staggering. These compounds could potentially save millions of lives, but releasing them improperly could create chaos. Untested treatments flooding black markets, exploitation by unscrupulous actors, dangerous applications without proper safety protocols. What would your grandfather have done? Frank asked. Frank. Becca thought about the journal entries she'd read, about Harold Jenkins' consistent ethical framework across decades of research. He would have ensured the knowledge reached trustworthy medical researchers while maintaining sufficient oversight to prevent misuse. Her mind was suddenly flooded with clarity. The path forward wasn't about choosing between government control and reckless release. It was about creating a third option that honored her grandfather's intentions while addressing legitimate safety concerns. I need to make copies, she decided. Secure, authenticated copies of the core research, distributed to multiple independent research institutions with the expertise to develop these treatments responsibly. Frank nodded slowly. A distributed approach. No single point of control, but sufficient regulation through existing medical research frameworks. Exactly. These aren't weapons or military technologies. They're medical treatments. They belong in medical research channels. Becca began gathering the materials from the cabinet. And we need to move quickly. Once Collins arrives tomorrow, this option disappears. I assume you have a plan for getting this material out without alerting our NSA friends upstairs, Frank asked. Becca smiled slightly. As a matter of fact, I do. Remember Tyler's friend from school, the one whose mother works at Burlington Medical Research Foundation? Dr. Harrison, the one who specialized in rare genetic disorders before moving to Vermont. The very same. She's not just a leading researcher, she's also on the board of the International Medical Ethics Commission. If anyone would know how to handle revolutionary treatments responsibly, it's her. Frank looked impressed. You've been planning this possibility all along, haven't you? Let's just say I've been considering contingencies, like my grandfather, and taught me. Becca began carefully organizing the materials for transport. I'll need to create digital copies as well. The original samples and documentation stay here. I'm not stealing government property, just ensuring the knowledge isn't monopolized. And how do we get this to Dr. Harrison without the surveillance team noticing? Becca glanced at her watch. In about 20 minutes, Tyler's weekly automated online gaming session starts. He plays with friends every Wednesday night from 12:30 to 2 a.m. Frank looked confused. You let your 12-year-old stay up that late for video games? It's, a compromise we reached after the move. His friends back in Boston are in a different time zone now. Becca smiled. The point is, our internet activity spikes dramatically during these sessions. Perfect cover for a large encrypted data transfer. And the physical materials. That's where you come in. The NSA team is monitoring all vehicle movements, but they're primarily focused on the access points to the underground facility. Becca pointed to a detailed property map she had spread on the desk. There's a back trail through the northeast woodland that connects to your property. It doesn't appear on any recent surveys. Frank's expression shifted to one of understanding. The old logging path. I use it sometimes during hunting season, not wide enough for vehicles but perfectly manageable on foot. Exactly. If you could transport these materials to Dr. Harrison tonight, I can handle the digital transfer simultaneously. By morning, the key research will be secured with a trustworthy independent party. And if Collins discovers what we've done, Becca had considered this carefully. The original materials remain here. Legally, I've simply shared medical research with a qualified professional, research that my grandfather specifically left to me on property that I own. It's a gray area at worst. Frank nodded thoughtfully. A calculated risk, but one with potentially enormous benefit. He stood decisively. I'll need a backpack and about 30 minutes to prepare. Meet me at the north fence line at 1 a.m. As Frank departed to make his preparations, Becca returned to the meticulous task of organizing the most critical research components. Her grandfather had specifically separated the purely medical applications from the broader Project Prometheus technologies, creating a clear ethical distinction between humanitarian advancements and dual-use innovations. Working quickly but carefully, she prepared both physical samples and comprehensive documentation. The core compounds were stored in specialized containers designed for long-term stability. The synthesis instructions were detailed enough that a qualified research team could replicate the process using standard laboratory equipment. At 12:30 a.m. precisely, she heard the familiar sounds of Tyler's gaming session beginning in his bedroom above, right on schedule. Moving to the advanced computer system in her grandfather's private lab, she began the process of creating encrypted digital backups of all relevant research. The quantum computing architecture made the process remarkably efficient. Within minutes, she had compiled comprehensive data packages containing everything a medical research team would need to understand and develop her grandfather's breakthroughs. As the digital transfer began, disguised within Tyler's gaming bandwidth, Becca gathered the physical materials and made her way quietly up the spiral staircase. The main facility remained dimly lit with its ambient blue emergency lighting, creating an otherworldly atmosphere that still hadn't lost its capacity to awe her. At the top of the stairs, she paused, listening carefully. Agent Lawson had established a rotation schedule for the security team with minimal overnight presence to respect the Martinez family's privacy. According to the schedule Becca had memorized, the current patrol should be focused on the southern perimeter, leaving the northern woodland approach temporarily unmonitored. She emerged from the concealed barn entrance and quickly secured it behind her. The night was clear and cold, with a bright moon illuminating the Vermont landscape in silvery light. Moving with purpose but avoiding sudden movements that might trigger motion sensors, Becca made her way across the yard and into the sheltering darkness of the tree line. The northern fence was a simple affair, more for marking property boundaries than security. Beyond it, the old logging trail Frank had mentioned was barely visible, reclaimed by decades of forest growth, but still passable to someone who knew where to look. Frank was already waiting when she arrived, dressed in dark clothing with a military-grade backpack. His expression was serious but calm, the face of a man accustomed to operating under pressure. "Any complications?" he asked quietly as she approached. "None. The digital transfer is underway, masked by Tyler's gaming session. Agent Lawson is in the guest cottage, and the patrol team is focused on the south perimeter as expected." She handed him the carefully packed container. "Everything Dr. Harrison needs is here. Samples, synthesis protocols, research notes, and safety parameters. I've included a letter explaining the situation and my grandfather's intentions." Frank secured the materials in his backpack. "I'll deliver these directly to her home. She's expecting me." "Yes, I managed a brief encrypted message during yesterday's chaos. She understands the significance and has agreed to receive the materials personally." Becker hesitated, then added, "She also agrees with the distributed approach, ensuring multiple research institutions have access rather than any single entity controlling the breakthroughs." "A wise precaution," Frank nodded. "And your digital backup?" "Being transmitted to secure servers in Switzerland, Canada, and Japan, medical research facilities with strong ethical oversight and no direct government affiliations." Becker had chosen the destinations carefully, ensuring geographical and political diversity. "By morning, my grandfather's work will be preserved in multiple locations, beyond the reach of any single government's classification authority." Frank adjusted his pack and clasped Becker's shoulder briefly. "Harold Jenkins chose well when he selected you as his legacy keeper. You've balanced security with accessibility, just as he would have wanted." The simple validation meant more to Becker than Frank could know. Since discovering the facility, she had been haunted by uncertainty, questioning whether she was truly equal to the monumental responsibility her grandfather had placed upon her. "Be careful," she said. "The trail hasn't been maintained in years." "I've navigated worse in complete darkness," Frank replied, with the quiet confidence of a career soldier. "I'll contact you when the delivery is complete. Should be back before dawn." As Frank disappeared into the darkness of the forest, Becker stood for a moment, absorbing the weight of what they had set in motion. By morning, her grandfather's most important medical breakthroughs would be secured within legitimate research channels, positioned to benefit humanity broadly while maintaining appropriate scientific and ethical oversight. Returning to the house, she found Tyler still deeply engaged in his gaming session, completely unaware that his scheduled activity was providing cover for one of the most significant medical data transfers in history. The normality of it, a boy enjoying time with friends while extraordinary events unfolded around him, struck Becker as somehow perfect. She checked the secure tablet where she was monitoring the encrypted data transfers. Everything was proceeding smoothly, the files flowing outward to their designated destinations under the cover of Tyler's substantial bandwidth usage. With both operations underway, Becker returned to her grandfather's journal, seeking guidance on the next critical question: how to handle tomorrow's confrontation with Deputy Director Collins. The journal entries from the early 1970s seem particularly relevant, describing Harold Jenkins' own navigation of government oversight and classified research protocols. One passage stood out with striking clarity: the fundamental error in government classification systems is treating all advanced technologies as potential weapons first and humanitarian tools second. This inverted priority creates a framework where beneficial applications are delayed or suppressed, while military applications are accelerated. I have come to believe that certain discoveries, particularly medical breakthroughs, must be evaluated through a different ethical framework entirely, one that prioritizes human well-being over institutional control. The words felt like direct guidance across the decades. Her grandfather had faced these same dilemmas and had concluded that certain knowledge belonged to humanity collectively rather than to any government or institution. His careful preservation of the medical research, separate from the other Project Prometheus technologies, was a deliberate ethical statement. Becker's tablet chimed softly, indicating that the digital transfers were complete. All three designated research facilities had received and acknowledged the encrypted data packages. The digital component of her contingency plan was successfully executed. Now, she needed to prepare for what would come next. Deputy Director Collins would arrive at 9 a.m. with his extraction team, ready to transfer all materials to a secure government facility. The political directives he had received apparently superseded their original agreement with Agent Lawson, Becca had no intention of physically resisting this transfer that would be both futile and potentially dangerous, but she needed to establish clear boundaries and ensure that her legal rights as the property owner were respected. More importantly, she needed to navigate the situation without revealing that key research components had already been secured elsewhere. She drafted a formal statement asserting her ownership claims while acknowledging legitimate national security concerns. The document carefully delineated the different categories of technology within the facility, making a legal distinction between the core Project Prometheus systems and her grandfather's subsequent independent research. Around 3:30 a.m., her phone vibrated with a secured message from Frank. Package delivered successfully. Recipient extremely impressed with contents. Returning via alternate route, ETA 5:30. Relief washed over her. The physical materials were now safely in Dr. Harrison's possession, a leading medical researcher with the expertise to understand their significance and the ethical framework to deploy them responsibly. Both aspects of her contingency plan had been executed successfully. By dispersing her grandfather's medical breakthroughs to multiple independent research institutions, she had ensured they couldn't be suppressed or controlled by any single entity. The knowledge would now flow through legitimate scientific channels, subject to appropriate ethical oversight, but free from exclusive government classification. As dawn approached, Becca prepared for the difficult conversation ahead. Deputy Director Collins would undoubtedly be furious when he eventually discovered that key research components had been distributed beyond government control. Agent Lawson might face professional consequences for the security lapses that had made this possible, but Becca believed deeply that she had fulfilled her grandfather's true intentions, preserving the most humanitarian aspects of his work in a way that would benefit people globally. Whatever personal or legal challenges might follow, that knowledge gave her strength. When Agent Lawson knocked on the farmhouse door at 7 a.m., Becca was already dressed and prepared, a fresh pot of coffee waiting in the kitchen. The agent's expression was troubled as she entered. Deputy Director Collins has moved up his arrival, Lawson said without preamble. He'll be here within the hour, with a full extraction team and formal written orders from the National Security Council. I suspected as much, Becca replied calmly, pouring coffee for them both. The potential value of my grandfather's research was too significant to respect our original agreement. Lawson accepted the coffee with a grateful nod. I fought to maintain our arrangement, but I was overruled at the highest levels. Once word reached certain circles about the potential medical applications, particularly the cancer treatment protocols. Politics intervened, Becca finished for her. Breakthrough cancer treatments are too valuable politically to leave in private hands. Essentially, yes. Lawson looked genuinely regretful. I believe your grandfather's concerns about government control were legitimate, but I'm bound by my oath and position. I understand, Becca said, surprising the agent with her equanimity, and I've prepared accordingly. Something in her tone made Lawson look up sharply. What have you done, Ms. Martinez? Ensured that my grandfather's intentions are honored, Becca replied simply. The medical research will benefit humanity broadly, not be controlled by any single entity. Before Lawson could respond, the sound of multiple vehicles approaching drew their attention to the window. A convoy of black SUVs and transport trucks was rolling up the driveway, led by a sedan that could only contain Deputy Director Collins. It appears we're out of time for further discussion, Becca observed, setting down her coffee cup. Shall we greet our visitors? The scene that unfolded over the next several hours was tense, but ultimately anticlimactic. Deputy Director Collins presented formal documentation authorizing the complete removal of all research materials and technology from the underground facility. The extraction team, highly trained specialists in handling classified materials, began the meticulous process of documenting and packing everything for transport. Becca cooperated fully, providing access and information as requested. She presented her formal statement, asserting certain ownership rights, which Collins acknowledged with clear irritation, but couldn't legally dismiss. The materials would be relocated to a government facility, but Becca would retain certain access privileges as the legal property owner. Throughout the process, she maintained a calm, professional demeanor that seemed to unsettle Collins more than resistance would have. He had clearly expected a confrontation and appeared suspicious of her cooperation. When the extraction team reached her grandfather's private laboratory, Becca tensed slightly. The cabinet that had contained the duplicated materials was now empty, the space cleaned so thoroughly that no trace remained of what had been stored there. Collins noticed immediately. "This storage unit appears to have been recently accessed," he observed, running a finger along the empty shelf. "What was contained here, Ms. Martinez?" "My grandfather's personal effects," she replied truthfully, if incompletely. "Family photographs, letters, mementos. I removed them yesterday for sentimental reasons. I assume personal items aren't covered by your extraction authorization." The half-truth created a moment of uncertainty. Collins glanced at Agent Lawson, who nodded slightly, confirming that personal effects had been excluded from the formal authorization. "Those items should still be documented," Collins insisted. "Of course. They're in my bedroom. I'd be happy to show them to your team." Becca had indeed preserved numerous personal items from the facility, photographs, letters, and mementos that had no scientific significance but immense personal value. The moment of tension passed, and the extraction continued. By mid-afternoon, the underground facility had been systematically emptied of all research materials, technology, and documentation. Only the physical structure remained, the rooms, corridors, and basic infrastructure that had housed her grandfather's secret work for decades. As the convoy prepared to depart with its valuable cargo, Deputy Director Collins approached Becca for a final conversation. "You've been surprisingly cooperative, Ms. Martinez," he observed, his tone suggesting this contradicted his expectations. "I appreciate that you recognize the national security implications of your grandfather's work." "I recognize many implications of his work," Becca replied carefully. "National security is certainly among them, though perhaps not foremost in his own considerations." Collins studied her face, clearly sensing something beneath her measured response. "You'll receive formal documentation regarding your continued access rights within 30 days. Until then, this property remains under federal monitoring." "I understand. Will Agent Lawson continue to be our primary contact?" "Agent Lawson has been reassigned," Collins said flatly. "Going forward, you'll coordinate with my office directly." The implication was clear. Lawson was being sidelined, likely due to her advocacy for Becca's position, another casualty of bureaucratic politics. As the last vehicles departed, leaving only a minimal security team to monitor the property, Becca stood on the porch of her farmhouse, watching the dust settle on the driveway. Tyler joined her, having observed most of the day's activities from a respectful distance. "Did they take everything?" he asked quietly. "Everything they found," Becca corrected, putting an arm around his shoulders. "But knowledge isn't so easily contained." Tyler looked up at her, understanding dawning in his expression. "You did something last night, didn't you? That's why you weren't worried today. Let's just say I honored your great-grandfather's intentions. The breakthroughs that can help people won't be locked away in a government vault." Frank Wilson's truck appeared at the end of the driveway, returning from an apparent supply run to town that had conveniently kept him away during the most intensive extraction activities. "Perfect timing," Becca observed with a small smile as Frank parked and approached the porch, carrying grocery bags that provided a plausible explanation for his absence. "Did our government friends find everything they were looking for?" He asked, his casual tone belied by the meaningful look he exchanged with Becca. "They found what they expected to find," she replied. "The important things are where they need to be." That evening, as the three of them sat around the kitchen table, sharing a simple dinner, Becca's secure tablet chimed with an incoming message. It was from Dr. Harrison, sent through the encrypted channel they had established. "Initial analysis confirms everything you indicated. The molecular structures are revolutionary, unlike anything in current medical literature. We've assembled a preliminary research team with representatives from 3 independent institutions. First synthesis attempt scheduled for next week. We'll keep you informed of all developments. Humanity owes your grandfather an immeasurable debt." Becca showed the message to Frank and Tyler, a sense of profound satisfaction washing over her. Whatever legal challenges might lie ahead, whatever government complications might arise when the distributed research eventually became public, she knew with absolute certainty that she had fulfilled her grandfather's true legacy. Harold Jenkins had spent decades preserving knowledge that could transform human health, protecting it from institutional control until the right moment and the right person could release it into the world. Not recklessly, not without oversight, but through legitimate scientific channels that would ensure its responsible development. 6 months later, as Becca sat in the audience at the International Medical Conference in Geneva, she felt a profound sense of completion. On stage, Dr. Harrison was presenting the preliminary results of clinical trials for what was now called Jenkins therapy, a revolutionary treatment approach showing unprecedented success rates against previously untreatable cancers. The medical community had responded to the breakthrough with appropriate scientific rigor but unprecedented cooperation. 3 major research institutions had collaborated to validate the synthesis methods, conduct safety trials, and develop practical treatment protocols. The distributed approach had worked exactly as Becca had hoped, preventing any single entity from controlling the breakthrough while ensuring proper scientific and ethical oversight. The US government had eventually discovered what she had done, of course. 3 months after the extraction, Deputy Director Collins had appeared at Willow Creek Farm with formal allegations of unauthorized distribution of classified materials. The legal battle that followed had been intense, but ultimately resolved in Becca's favor when the courts determined that Harold Jenkins' personal research, conducted after official project decommissioning, was not clearly subject to government classification. Agent Lawson, though reassigned from direct involvement, had provided crucial testimony about the ethical framework Dr. Jenkins had established and his clear intention to separate humanitarian applications from broader national security concerns. The outcome had established an important legal precedent regarding the classification boundaries of government-funded research, a precedent that would influence scientific freedom for generations to come. As Dr. Harrison concluded her presentation to thunderous applause, Becca thought about the barn renovation that had started this extraordinary journey. What had begun as a simple project to create a new life for herself and Tyler had uncovered a legacy that would benefit countless lives around the world. Her grandfather had trusted her with perhaps the most important decision of her life, whether to surrender control of revolutionary medical breakthroughs to institutional interests, or ensure they reach those who needed them most. In choosing the latter path, despite the personal risks, she had honored not just his scientific genius, but his humanitarian vision. The underground facility beneath the barn remained empty now, its technological wonders relocated to government laboratories for study and potential application, But the most important discoveries, the ones that could alleviate suffering and save lives, were now flowing through medical channels worldwide, beyond the reach of any single government's control. Becca Martinez, who had once been simply a single mom renovating an old barn, had become the guardian of a legacy that would transform human health for generations to come. As she watched medical professionals from around the world discussing her grandfather's breakthroughs with excitement and hope, she knew with absolute certainty that she had made the right choice. The barn at Willow Creek Farm stood fully renovated now, its weathered red siding restored to its original glory. From the outside, it looked like any other historic Vermont barn, a simple agricultural structure with no hint of the extraordinary. Secrets it had once contained, just as her grandfather had intended. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.